Um, so now we'll be going over the next case study, which revolves around land degradation. Land degradation occurs when soil loses its fertility due to deforestation, overfarming, and climate change. This can lead to desertification, meaning land that was once productive becomes dry and barren. One of the most urgent examples of land degradation is happening in the Amazon rainforest in South America. Um, the Amazon rainforest is often called the lungs of the earth because it produces 20% of the world's oxygen. But deforestation, mainly due to illegal logging, cattle ranching, and agriculture, is destroying the rainforest at an alarming rate. And this threatens the indigenous communities, wildlife, and even global climate patterns. If deforestation continues, we risk losing one of the world's most important and diverse ecosystems. So, what are the causes of deforestation? So deforestation is a lot of it is prominent because of cattle ranching. Oh, one second. Cattle ranching, which is the largest contributor. So cattle ranching is basically providing land for to raise cattle to provide the meat we need and the dairy products we need. However, they need space to ranch or like have these cattle stay that could be. So it's for a lot of it is to make space for cattle ranching. Moreover, there's illegal logging and agricultural expansion. So illegal logging is basically cutting down trees illegally without permission for what because we need for wood and other resources that can be for the natural resources that come from trees. And then agriculture expansion like soybean farming, so like cutting down trees to make space for agriculture and to grow food. Another cause is wildfires, both accidental and intentional, to clear the land. And then obviously there's infrastructure development, roads and dams, that they're also resulting in deforestation because of the growing population to make space and build infrastructure, and we're cutting down the forest for that. So how's this impacting the forest? There's a loss of biodiversity. It is the Amazon rainforest is home to 10% of known species and many unknown species. It is said that if there's a cure to cancer, it's probably in the Amazon rainforest. That's how diverse and unexplored the Amazon rainforest is, and we're just cutting it down. There's increased carbon emissions and accelerating climate change. Because we're cutting down so many trees, they're not able to sequester the carbon dioxide in the air, which is leading to more heat being trapped. Like we said, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas that traps heat into the earth, which causes climate change. So increased carbon emissions as a result of deforestation. And then all the indigenous communities that live in the forest are being displaced and their cultures are threatened. So all of these indigenous communities are having to leave their countries and their communities and find a new home, which is threatening their culture. So what is the government or what is happening in response to, or how are we trying to combat this issue? So first of all, there's government protections, so indigenous reserves and national parks. So the government puts regulations on certain areas, and if those regulations are broken, then there's consequences. Reforestation efforts and sustainable agriculture or agroforestry. So like people are trying to restore the the areas that have been deforested by like agroforestry. So it's like growing plants that are like kind of resemble the forest but also can provide food. And then global campaigns to reduce deforestation, like is the Amazon Fund and REDD Plus. And then consumer pressure on companies to avoid deforestation linked products. So people are like avoiding buying products that are a product of deforestation. So what are some countries doing in response to land degradation? First is Brazil. So Brazil, for their Amazon rainforest, like we talked about, there are policies to reduce deforestation while promoting sustainable farming, like agroforestry, like encouraging agroforestry, mixing trees with crops to maintain soil fertility while also providing food. Then the impact is deforestation rates in the Amazon have dropped 80% between 2004 and 2012. So we can see this as a positive ramification and how like increased awareness of this issue is resulting in less deforestation and we're preserving this forest. And though rates have fluctuated, there's a overarching decrease. And then improved crop yields while maintaining biodiversity. So there's more food that's available while there's also biodiversity that's preserved, like as a result of like agroforestry. Also in Africa, what they're doing is the Great Green Wall Initiative, which is an African-led movement aiming to build an 8,000-kilometer natural wall of trees across the Sahel from Senegal to Djibouti. And it focuses on combating desertification and improving food security and creating jobs. So they're planning on creating this wall of plants that can reduce desertification and improve food security and also create a lot of jobs. So what's the impact of this? 18 million hectares of degraded land were restored. That's insane. And 350,000 jobs were created and 9 million people benefited. So it's initiatives like this that are offsetting the negative consequences of our actions. And it is important to continue having initiatives like this. Lastly, we're going to be talking about biodiversity and biodiversity loss and over. But before that, I'd like to show you guys a video about the Amazon rainforest and how much of it has been cut down and how much of an important issue this is.
And talk about this new study that shows that the world's biggest rainforest, the Amazon, has lost an area the size of Germany and France combined to deforestation in 4 decades. Let's show you this image. It's a map showing the scale of the Brazilian rainforest in 1985. The dark green section is the Amazon. Now, look at this. The same country in 2023, and you can see how much of the forest has disappeared. Let's speak to Professor Michael Sweet, head of the Nature-Based Solutions Research Centre at the University of Derby. Very good to have you with us, Michael. I think it almost needs repeating, doesn't it? The Amazon has lost an area the size of Germany and France combined in 4 decades. Just take us through what's happening to one of the world's most precious resources.
Yeah, so that's 12.5% of the Amazon's cover. Previously, people have been talking about deforestation of around 17%, so it's not unsurprising, this value, but it's the around 17%, so it's not unsurprising, this value, but it's the first time that it's been catalogued in such a reliable method. So that's 1/5 of the entire Amazon, which is now gone. But it gets even worse than that because, unfortunately, the more and more hectares are at threat. So it's thought to be about 38% of the forest as well, on top of that, are actually in a degraded state.
And Michael, this is the fault of humankind?
Yeah, so sadly, it's mostly deforestation. It's associated with agriculture for the most part, but then it's also entwined and linked with aspects of climate change, which again are anthropogenically driven, so human-derived climate change, and that's causing the forests to dry out a lot more. So they're witnessing less rain, and so the Amazon, on top of losing the trees, the important tree aspect, and obviously the biodiversity which goes with that, the rivers are starting to dry out as well. And obviously the Amazon is famous for its river, as well as being the lungs of our planet, as the trees are concerned. And we're now starting to see devastating effects with this recently 120 of the endangered river dolphins being found dead as the river subsides.
Professor Michael Sweet, thank you very much for joining us.
So that shows how much all of these things are very intertwined: climate change, human actions, and resulting in such negative consequences on our planet, and it's just a loop. So it's really important to educate ourselves about these issues so we can stop this loop and we can do something about our the issues that our environment is facing that are greater than ever. So next is biodiversity loss. Biodiversity, or the variety of life on Earth, is declining rapidly. Habitat deconstruction, climate change, and illegal poaching are major threats to wildlife. So in this case study, coral bleaching, we're going to be talking about coral bleaching in the Great Barrier Reef next in Australia. The Great Barrier Reef is one of the most diverse ecosystems on Earth and is suffering from coral bleaching due to the rising ocean temperatures. When corals experience heat stress, they expel the algae living inside of them, turning white and becoming vulnerable to disease. And if we don't take action, the world's coral could be lost within our lifetime. And coral is home to it's home to countless organisms, and this will result in a huge loss of biodiversity. So this is where the Great Barrier Reef is located. It's right next to the coast of Australia. It's the biggest coral reef system and UNESCO World Heritage Site that is visible from space. So what are the causes of this loss of biodiversity? Rising ocean temperatures due to climate change are obviously one of the biggest causes of coral bleaching and the loss of the Great Barrier Reef. So like as you guys can see, there's a common theme among all of these is climate change, because of the release of greenhouse gases, which is trapping heat, and all of these are connected to climate change in one way or another. And climate change is a big part of why we're facing these issues today. Another is ocean acidification again, because CO2 absorption making oceans more acidic, which is causing the coral to become white and vulnerable because there's so much CO2 in our atmosphere. And then there's pollution from agricultural runoff, which is causing algal blooms. This is basically when we use a lot of fertilizer in our agriculture, which is runoff, like which has like phosphorus and the algae like thrive off of this. So they're growing at rapid paces in the ocean, and they absorb. And after they grow at this rapid pace because of the runoff, or like when the water goes through agricultural feeds and goes into the ocean, it brings all these nutrients from the fertilizers with it, and then the algae thrives off of this, and there's lots of algal blooms where there's too much algae growing, and which results in too much algae. And then once the algae dies off, they absorb all the oxygen in the ocean, which causes fish to die because fish need that oxygen to survive. So, which is causing algal blooms, resulting in organisms in the ocean dying. And then there's overfishing, which is disrupting the marine ecosystem. So, there's a lot of fishing and commercial use of the organisms in the Great Barrier Reef, which is hurting the ecosystem, the marine ecosystem of the GBR. So what are the impacts? Coral bleaching events of 2016, 2017, and 2020 killed large portions of the reefs, and then which resulted in a loss of biodiversity. It's a habitat for more than 1,500 fish species and other marine life. The tourism industry, valued at $6 billion, faces an economic decline because of all the coral bleaching and the dying out of certain areas of the Great Barrier Reef. And then ripple effects on global fisheries and local communities. So as a result of less tourism, there's economic causes, like there's less economic or like money in this or coming into the city, which is having an impact on global fisheries, and they aren't able to fish as much in local communities. So what is happening in response to the coral bleaching and the loss of biodiversity in the Great Barrier Reef? Marine protected areas. They've implemented marine protected areas such as no fishing zones. We actually have these implemented on our coast too, like next to PV. There's certain areas where no fishing is allowed, and if there is fishing or there is any kind of activity that's harming the ecosystem, then there's negative consequences. Then there's coral farming and restoration projects that are happening in the GBR, and global climate change agreements like the Paris Agreement targets, which are trying to fight global effects of climate change and trying to take into account these huge impacts that some ecosystems are having, and local efforts to reduce agricultural runoff, which is causing the algal blooms and causing fish to die out. So what are some other countries doing to fight the loss of biodiversity? First, there's the United States Endangered Species Act, or the ESA. So what they're doing is they enacted the Endangered Species Act to protect threatened species and establishing national parks and wildlife refuges, which protect biodiversity. And then certain endangered species are not allowed to be, like humans aren't allowed to be around them or poach them or whatever. Then there's Costa Rica, which Forest and Wildlife Conservation. What they're doing is they pay landowners to preserve forests under the payment of the Environmental Service PES program. And over 25% of Costa Rica is protected land. So landowners are given money in order to protect their lands and not like build infrastructure or whatever to like protect the natural habitat of these organisms. Lastly, there's New Zealand, which is has their predator-free 2050 initiative. What they're doing is they're aiming to eradicate or get rid of non-native predators, rats, stoats, possums by 2050 to protect their native birds, and because these animals are harming the population of native birds and native organisms. They use traps and community involvement to reduce predator populations that are also harming their organisms, their native organisms in the area. So that's it for the case studies around the world, that like to show you guys like real world examples of how like these environmental issues are affecting people today and what steps people are taking in order to combat them. Thank you for listening.